Well, welcome. This is the first of 4 sessions that we are pulling together to help those who are going to look at the IHE-HL7 Joint Gemini project, this SDPi 1.0 specification. So these are briefings specifically to help reviewers who haven't been in all the weeds and details over the last almost 3 years, but need to come up to speed on the architecture and those things that are unique and the specifics of the application. So welcome aboard to this first one. I'll tell you that we're recording it, so you can hopefully review it. We'll re-record these 4 sessions before we go to public comment, which right now we're hoping to be the end of January. So this is kind of a trial run, if you will, and it's also not intended to be a polished presentation. We're actually going to spend time going through the actual spec documents, the rendered HTML, the ASCII doc, we'll explain what that is, the unique aspects of it as we, the content creators, have crafted it, and then we can look at that. So you understand what's under the hood and then the HTML that you're looking at. But we're still working on getting to the SDPi 1.0 final draft. We're hoping to complete that within the next week. And so a bit of this is work in progress. So we apologize in advance for the cruft, the kind of the messiness. We haven't swept it all up. You'll see to-dos and yellow stuff in there that we hope to pull up. And with that, also, we feel free to ask questions. So raise your hand, but go ahead and if there's some point that doesn't make sense, feel free to ask those questions. I will try to remember to take pauses, but as you know, I kind of get on a roll, so feel free to interrupt, okay? And with that, here are the 4 presentations that we're looking at over these sessions. There's this one, the general overview. I'll give you an agenda of topics in a minute. The next one, we have 2 next week. One is just the profiles, so kind of drilling down on the 4 profiles. That is unique for this SDPi supplement. Usually an IHE profile supplement only has 1. But this one actually integrates 4. They're all around the SDPi profiles, but they're separate. So this supplement is a little bit unique in that regard. So the next one will take you on a tour from use cases to each of the 4 profiles, to the transactions, to the semantic content, to give you an orientation. Now, we're not going to try to delve into all the details and do the review in these sessions. We're trying to give you enough background so you can navigate this fairly large and extensive specification. So that'll be on Monday of next week. And then we have a unique section on gateways. There's 2 very specific gateways. There's 3 actually. One is for HL7 version 2. So the IHE devices PCD profiles were based on version 2 messaging. So we have kind of the general aspects of that. And then the IHE PCD deck profile, as well as the ACM profile for alert communication management. So the session a week from now will be focused on those gateways as well. And then in January, I think on the 11th, Wednesday again, we have a general Q&A session. So once we manage the holidays, the new year, kind of get back and turned around, we will then go and kind of have an opportunity for people to come back and say, wait a second, this doesn't make any sense, or can you give more detail on that? Our hope is to be able to complete the review sessions or the review period for IHE devices internal by the end of January, on Wednesday, January 25th, to have a vote meeting and be able to then send it to publications, IHE publications, for public comment through February, and hopefully wrap that up for trial implementation publication by early March of this year. So that's the big plan, these 4 sessions, and I'll pause now before we get into session number 1 detail. Any questions? All right, well, feel free to ask. So again, the general overview. And we're planning 90 minutes, at least an hour, and we'll have some time at the end for questions. Now, this is a long list of topics, okay? But this was primarily so we can kind of keep track of where we're at. I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about the big picture. You've seen these before if you've been looking at our Gemini SDPi plus Fire briefings. So we'll look at some of those to help you reorient toward what is in the supplement. We'll talk about how we go about developing this. We're not going to spend a lot of time on this, but it helps you understand how we go from general conversations in our meetings, our project meetings, to using how we do planning, how we use GitHub, and then we'll get into the GitHub itself, okay, and how the development is really focused on there, and then how we use AsciiDoc. In that open tool chain. We'll look at things using a tool called IntelliJ, as well as a special converter project that David Gregorchek has created to help us get into the rendered HTML that actually then looks like an IHE supplement. We'll look at the outline for the supplement, and then we'll go into some of the unique distinctives. What do I mean by that? Things that are kind of a unique way that we're doing it here. There's been a lot of talk elsewhere in IHE, and some of this has been done, but we're taking a kind of a unique extended approach to this. So this is when you look at the supplement and you're like, wait a second, I haven't seen this before. We're going to introduce those topics here to kind of give you a handle on where we're coming from, what they are, so they're not surprising. And then I kind of lumped volume 0 and 1 together. Volume 2, just some distinctives. We're not going to go into the transaction details. We'll do that on the next session number 2. And then in volume 3, again, kind of what is unique to that. And we'll have a specific time for Q&A at the end if there's any remaining questions. So with that, let's get started. So the first one is this SDPi profiles, the big picture. And I think if I were to we have this in a couple places. So what I'm first going to do is go, where is this? Go here. So we're going to work off of this browser. This is our github.com SDPi Fire wiki. Okay, so this is the repository. I'm going to put some links in the chat, and we'll probably capture those in the notes afterwards. But on here, there's a number of articles. And notice that there's one for IHE supplement. I'm over here on the right side. So if you click on that, you're going to get this graphic and kind of a high-level overview of the different parts of this. So that's where this is located. I'm going to switch, though, to a to a graphic here that will help you see it in this kind of PowerPoint detail. Here. So you've seen this before. As I said, when we talk about SDPi profiles, and that's service-oriented device plug and trust interoperability. Service-oriented device point of care plug and trust interoperability. We have 4 profiles. These are 4 functions, just core functions that we use, that implementers might use. One is plug and trust connectivity, and so that is basic connectivity, how devices can connect, discover each other on a network, and it's device-to-device connectivity, not going through gateways. Is the primary focus of this. And then we have 3 more medically oriented functions. One is just reporting, so a device reporting out information. Another is alerting. So how do we work together to support in this plug and trust interoperable network alert support? And that includes some advanced capabilities that'll be in subsequent versions of the SDPi, such as alert delegation and full support for a silent point of care. And then device external control. And that's these are 4 profiles. They independently look back to these core standards. So connectivity, all of them leverage the SDC core standards. We'll look at those in a minute. and also the participant key purposes standards, which say how do you actually do these in a safe way when you're interconnected. We have two of those. We'll look at those specific ones briefly, but we also have two published now, or they're approved. They're heading to publication, and that's the base one, which would primarily map to this profile here, and then the metrics, or the one for reporting. And then in 2022, we should see alerting published, completed and published, and hopefully a good start and maybe even a ballot for the external control. That might be a 2024 item. But that's the connection here. Notice this medical interoperability purpose. So we have 4 profiles. They're linked to these ISO IEEE 11073 SDC standards, but then we also have these relationships, and that drives our gateway definitions to both HL7 version 2 and the HL7 Fire, devices on fire work. And so those would also support these kinds of gateway interfaces. So we would have an HL7 Fire for reporting, maybe for alerting, and then for alerting. And then these are the IHE devices PCD profiles, DEC and ACM. And that's what we're going to look at in more detail in a subsequent briefing next week. I think a week from today, Wednesday of next week, the 21st. So this kind of gives you the overall big picture of what we have in this SDPi supplement. One supplement, that's primarily the blue space, 4 profiles, which have different actors, and implementation systems can implement those as appropriate, and then gateways that allow us to connect what is around a single point of care, like an operating room table, an ICU bed, an emergency room bed, the devices and technologies, medical technology around that, to then integrate with a more enterprise-facing technology, for example, in DEC and ACM or HL7 Fire. So that's the big picture. I'm not going to spend a lot more time on that, but I'll pause to make sure everybody, does anybody have questions about this part of the overview? Okay. So if we go back, and I'll do that again, sorry for popping in and out. I will, if we go back to our outline, we have a unique way that we've pulled together for doing this. Now, this is doing our work. So we're on the second bullet here. This is a Gemini co-working approach and tooling. This is a joint IHE-HL7 devices project. So the intent is we use tools and we use shared processes between the two organizations. For IHE devices, for HL7 devices, we have co-worked together very closely, as well as the IEEE 11073 group for point of care devices has worked closely together, as well as personal health devices. So how do we do that, and how do we tool that? And if I go back now to our wiki, notice here, this is the GitHub SDPi-Fire wiki. Notice we have an article on this, and that's this one right here. And so when you look at this article, it gives us this approach right here. And we have all of our notes and discussions and action items we capture in HL7 Confluence pages. We have a lot of content there. It's all open, it's all easily accessible, but we also have topics of interest, which are key issues that we say, you know, this is something that we need to figure out. How are we going to identify that? How are we going to resolve that? So we capture those, and in these meetings, we work through those. And at some point, we say, okay, we got an agreement, a consensus on how we want to do that. So that's kind of the community discussion. Then we go into the tracking and planning. So how do we actually move that toward reality and plan on building out, especially the specifications, the tooling, the connect-a-thons, the demonstrations, all of that. So we use a tool called Smartsheet for that. very simple, lightweight online project tool that everybody can look at, contribute to, and work with. And we have linkages. I won't go into the details of those, but we identify projects, tasks, and then milestones. And the topics of interest also get integrated into there. If I were to look at that, this is what that looks like. I will again put this. Actually, let me give you this link. I think this is a better link. And I'll put that in the chat. And you can see that we had a transition project. So at this level, they're all projects. And this was to get us into being able to build out the spec. We have a project around the IHE-SDPi spec 1.0. One was just planning it out and putting the pieces together, content development, and then finalizing everything. We're right in the middle of that. We have tasks for the front matter, the general part of it, in the 3 volumes. And when we look down through these, we just peel these out to the next layer. So our actor summary definitions, transaction summary definitions, all of those. So this is how we actually identified what are all the pieces that we need. So that's what we're working on for 1.0. And the green indicates stuff we thought we needed to really have. The blue are things that would be nice to have, we need to do it, but not necessarily for 1.0. Then we also are looking at how to transfer this to IHE publications. We have to update this plan. We just finished a few days ago a revision of this, so the dates and everything need to be updated. But this is working with Mary Youngers and IHE publications to say, how do we take the spec, get it ready for public comment, publish it for trial implementation? How do we manage all of that? So that is a separate project. And that's what we're doing there. And then we're also looking at getting to an IHE Connect-a-thon, public demonstrations, coordination, other things. And so just to say, that's how we're using this smart sheet. And then we're going to spend the majority of today in GitHub. We've been using GitHub for this project since we started in early 2020. And we call the GitHub SDPi-Fire. And but what we have done now, and this was in the July-August timeframe, is we actually took and created the projects I just showed you and our set of tasks, and then we identify those with issues. And so we are within a GitHub, we have projects, we have a set of issues that we're working through with milestones. And then all of our work is really now centered around that. So for this part, what you're going to look at in a minute was really this kind of going from 2 years of working in Confluent space with lots of notes and lots of topics of interest and things that we're doing there, to now focusing in on, okay, let's manage this in terms of being able to put out the specification, move it through plug-a-thons, connect-a-thons, product conformity assessment, public demonstrations. We need to get better at that, and then get better at a regular cycle of reviews and incremental updates to it. So that is kind of what we're going to focus on now, and that's what we're doing here in this. I think the last thing I'll show you on here, there's 2 things. There's some articles. This article here is ASCII doc-based supplement content. So we're going to show you that, but there's a whole discussion about, do we want to do that? Use Markdown. Most IHE specifications are now being crafted in Markdown, or keep Word. Well, it's very clear that IHE has moved past Word. Everybody wants to get past Word. But then the next question is, do we use Markdown or do we use ASCII doc? We decided on ASCII doc, and the whole rationale, presentations for that, the tool chain for authoring ASCII doc-based content, the workflow for that, all of that is in this article. So give a look to that article. We also have editorial plans and versions. And so this is another wiki article, and it kind of gives you an idea of how are we going about doing major minor versioning. What do the development cycles look like? Like I said, in 23, we're hoping to get to incremental, maybe quarterly, at least 2 a year versions of SDPi, 1.1, 1.2, coming out with an annual major version 2.0 with the key new features that we want on there. So all of that planning is in here. And you can also find in this editorial team, so who's working on what? Who do we blame? Who do we contact? And this is the current editorial team for that and the key focus areas that they have. So all of this content is on the wiki for this SDPi-Fire GitHub repository. So with that, I think that was how we're working, and then I'll talk a little bit about ASCII doc in specific, and then GitHub focus for that. Any questions? I'll take a pause. Okay. So GitHub, if you're not familiar with GitHub, all of IHE profile development, supplements, all of that is now rooted in GitHub. It just provides all of the configuration management, the version management, the ability to have a mainline master document and then branch off of that, do development, have that all reviewed, pull that back in. That is all supported in GitHub. It's a general purpose tool. My guess is most everybody who's worked in a technical environment has used GitHub. By the way, we're also using it in HL7. They now have a GitHub repository. And for this, since it's a joint project, we'll take the SDPi GitHub version once we get to 1.0, and we'll probably replicate it on the HL7 side as well. So just a quick tour of here before we then get into the details of the supplement. Notice that has a set of tabs at the top. One is the master, master branch that you see here. And this is what we really want to keep clean. But notice it has all sorts of stuff. It doesn't have just a supplement. It has all these folders around conformity assessment and testing, community events. If I look in there, I'm going to see plugathon, things like that. If I look on ecos or education, I click on education. What's that? It's different updates and videos and things that we've done. We'll actually probably capture these recordings on that page as well as on the Confluence library page. But we put everything into this repository as a primary way of persisting, because when we started almost 3 years ago, we had no good way of having a repository that could persist in version other than Google Documents, which, as we know, is great in some respects, but it leaves a lot to be desired in terms of actually doing that. So all of that stuff is in here. Don't get confused. What we're looking at is in the SDPi supplement branch. And if I click that, I get this set of folders. I will put this in the link in the chat. And we archived everything we had over the last 2 years. So it's sitting there. So if you remember something from somewhere, including the draft Word version that we've migrated from, that's all in this archive here. And then we have these set of top level folders right here, including 2 key items. One is an ASCII doc converter. We'll talk. I'll have David talk about that in a moment. And then the ASCII doc sources themselves, as well as the SDPi supplement that gets rendered. So if I go back to the wiki very quickly, notice there's another article, SDPi file organization scheme. And so we said, how do we want to organize the files? Because it's not just one big ASCII doc file, even though we generate today a single HTML file, and we came up with this organization. I'm sorry that is not bigger. I guess I could expand that very quickly. There we go. But this is the organization, and it's in this wiki article, explains it. But we have this top level here. We have the tool, all the sources in there, the generated HTML artifacts, pre-publication, public publication is all in this SDPi supplement. We have sources, which are files that are used to create the actual content over here on the right, but they are not directly processed by ASCII doc. For example, PowerPoint. And so the PowerPoint for some of our graphics, we have those files in here. Referenced artifacts, ones that we reference like maybe a biceps XML specification that's referenced perhaps from volume 3, those would get collected in here. Or maybe MDIB file extensions with specific XML, those would get referenced in here. And then the ASCII doc folder has the actual content that gets rendered into the HTML that we'll publish, the specification. Subfolders for each of the volumes, a specific subfolder for the images. We use SVG for these that ASCII doc can directly render. Plant UML sources that can be rendered in real time by ASCII doc, and then listings, code listings. So sometimes, especially in Appendix A of Volume 2, where we have message, web service message listings and examples, those would be in here. So this is a very simple file structure that we provide, and that's what is captured in, I'm sorry, in, let me go back, in these files here. So I'm back in the master repo. So if we look, remember everything, if I go into ASCII doc here for the sources, that's where I'll see that file structure that we just talked about and we looked at, as well as the top level files. Let's see, I don't know that I want to spend a lot more time. I'm just trying to give you organization and orientation for what's under the hood. Oh yeah, the last part of this, as I said, we have, if you look at on top, we have master, we have branches. So if you actually look at all the branches, so if I were to do this, and I see this 29 branches. So from the master, we actually say, okay, I'm going to do work. And we take a branch, kind of a sandbox that we end up doing work on. Right now, I'm actively working on this branch right here, adding in the SDPi P profile, plug and trust profile content. So that's what, after this session, that's what Todd's going to try to finish off as quickly as possible. I think, David, you've been working, actually, no, this is Appendix B. So we'll get that one finished off. I think we're actually pretty finished with that one. I need to close that one out. Use cases, Peter, but these are my branches. When you look at active branches, these are ones. I think, David, you just got this one completed a few hours ago, earlier today.
That's correct.
It's ready to be closed. And this is the sandbox that Peter Chronic is working on for the ACM gateway. So we can branch, and then you have the ability to work in those branches. We also create issues. So all the work we do is tied to an issue, a specific area that we're working on. And so if we look at those issues, sometimes they're related to topics of interest. So we have TOI issues. Others that we have, for example, there's this one. Where is my, well, let me just look at one of these. Section, table numbering, file alignment. So this is one, where we want to get all of the table numbering and alignment and all of that done according to the IHE conventions, which are a little bit of a challenge. And so we create an issue. We have what the intended work is. All the work that's done in the branch is captured, so we can always go back and say, well, who did what? We can comment on it. We can asynchronously do that. This one, David is the key for this one. And then we also oftentimes have a branch that we're working in. Of course, I picked one that didn't have an active branch. Let me look at this. This is one, well, no, let me just look at this one. Okay, so this is one that has been worked on. I think Peter's, we actually, so Peter has been the main one on this one. Central SDC service participants defining these system types nomenclature. This, Peter, you did today. This is real recent stuff. And so we're doing that in a sandbox, and we'll end up going and looking at that and reviewing it. And then you do pull requests. So when you want to go and review it, you can actively pull that in. So for example, on this one here, this is one that David worked on. Just a very simple uncomment of an item. So it's a simple issue. And when you look at the issue, you can look at the number of times you've actually updated the branch committed to it, the checks that have been performed to make sure that it's consistent, the files that have changed. So this file was all in a single file. And so what you'll see when you do the review, if you're interested, you could actually go down to this level of detail. So this is what was changed in this issue. And then I think the last thing, we have the projects over here. And we have the 3 projects that you saw in the smart sheet. Right now, we're just really focused on this baseline document project, and we'll work on that. And then actions. And the last part about the action that's pretty important is to be able to look at what happens whenever we upload, commit, and then merge to master. We always do checks, and David will talk to that in a moment here. Running that tool and a bunch of actions, and so those actions for this one, you see what was work that was done earlier today, and we run a set of checks. And if I look at the one that was done earlier today, you see that David did it. It resulted in success. You can look at the build script for that. These builds and checks happen all day long, and we each time generate an actual rendering of the supplement, an HTML rendering of the supplement here. So what we'll look at in a few minutes is that rendering. This is the one I think that was done earlier today when David did that little change and pushed it back in, and we'll look at that. We're almost ready to get into the details of that. I think David, and I guess the last part of that is the beauty of doing this is we can always go back and see, well, when did this change get in? And if something broke something, or if we're wondering why, or what was the issue it was tied to, using GitHub in this way with a master branch or a master branches, working in those sandboxes, issues, doing pull requests, reviewing it, and then integrating it back in. Constantly checking, so kind of a continuous build process. It ensures the integrity and very, very easy but clear control and management of that. So any questions before I have David spend a little bit of time, gives us a rationale and to the ASCII doc converter and IntelliJ use. Any questions? All right. David, I could display stuff, or you could display it. Which would you rather?
Depends. So maybe as I have the SDPi supplement IntelliJ application open right now, I can also share my screen. So we came up with the ASCII doc format because it has support in many IDEs, and you can have a plugin that is integrated well into the system, and then just code your ASCII doc code right away, and you have an inline view of the actual output or the estimated output of all of that. So I'm going to quickly share the screen, and in hope that I'm always a little confused when I'm working with Zoom. Share screen. And I think this should do the trick. Make it a little bit smaller. And as you can see, it's essentially, it's the IntelliJ IDE. This one is the community edition that is available for free. You can just download it, and it's okay to use it with open source artifacts, which means also with the SDPi supplement, and don't have to pay for it necessarily. The charm of the IntelliJ IDE is that you have built-in support for ASCII doc and PlantUML once you install the plugins, which you can do if you go to the settings, search for plugin, and you see takes a little bit before the marketplace loads the plugins. But if you look at the installed ones, there is the plant UML integration and ASCII-Doc plugin. Those have to be installed, and after that, you get this beautiful view that you see right here. So checked out is the SDPi supplement folder of the SDPi supplement repository as available by on GitHub. And as you can see, I'm here in the SDPi supplement subfolder, and this is the ASCII-Doc sources. And then you can just, for example, open the SDPi supplement ASCII-Doc root file, which then opens the entire supplement information. It takes a while as it is initializing and compiling the supplement as I'm writing stuff in here. This then ends up in this ugly looking preview, which is because of the limit, the size limitations of the screen. But usually if you scroll down, you can just see that this is on the left side, a little condensed. I can change the view, for example, over here, so I will only see the entire document and not the source code anymore. And as you can see, this is rendered in line. And if my screen is wide enough, I can add it in here and at the same time see the changes on the right side. It's a little slow, but it's typically, it's very slow. Actually, I don't know why. Typically, it's not that slow. But anyway, so the point is you have this development area where you can type in your source code and it will appear on the right side right away. Once you think you're finished with your work, you can create a PDF or an HTML explicitly and just check out your latest changes to the document and how they would look like in an actual output. Once this is done, you have to get acquainted to the ASCII-Doc markup, of course, otherwise you won't be able to produce neat-looking output. But it's not as hard as it look in the first place. So it's like you have the main file includes a title. You have attributes that are internally available to the document during development. You have this markdown or this markdown-like annotations or markup that ASCII-Doc also provides. You can annotate those, we call it blocks in ASCII-Doc, that then supports special features which are processed by a tool that I exclusively wrote for the IHE SDPi supplement. And that is the next part. As you can see here, there is the ASCII-Doc converter, which is a software tool that is able to read in the ASCII-Doc information, the ASCII-Doc files, and then convert it into an HTML that has a correct numbering in there in terms of the IHE requirements. It performs checks like verifying the requirement keyword levels, or verifying that requirement numbers aren't duplicated and stuff like that. And this then generates an HTML output, which is close to the final document. And this ASCII-Doc converter can either be invoked by IntelliJ directly, or it is also invoked as part of the continuous integration chain, which is in GitHub called the GitHub Actions, which was shown by Todd a couple of minutes ago. And I would like to go back there and just show you how this interacts with this ASCII-Doc converter tool. So I quickly switch the view area. It's going to be this guy here. You should see something by now.
Yep.
If you are on the SDPi -fire GitHub IHE GitHub page, you see the code, and then there is the actions, and the actions is your entry point to all the artifacts that are either generated as part of the issues that are being under work, or as part of the latest, greatest master state that we have in the repository. Verify and upload SDPi supplement is actually the entry point if you're looking for the actual output as we expect it to be for the IHE publication process. If you are working on a specific issue, and once you push your changes to the GitHub servers, this verify and upload SDPi supplement job or action is invoked, and this one generates the output. If you click on this, Todd has shown this before, you can go down below and you can then download this generated artifact, which in turn includes the HTML markup and also the images that have been generated as part of the process. But this is exclusive to the working branch or a working branch that is someone is currently working on. If you want to see what's the latest state, the latest greatest state of the supplement looks like, you just check out the latest master state. And this one gives you a similar list with the difference that this is the state of the master. So this is what, if we would publish today, would be available for the readers to implement the SDPi supplement. And you can do the same. You can just click on here. You see it's annotated with the latest master state, and then you have also have a download file, SDPi supplement, which then downloads a zip file, and this one includes the HTML and images. Can open that up here, and now you don't see anything because it's shared in another screen. But anyway, so this one is the zip that then contains the information that has been generated by the ASCII-Doc converter tool, and this is done automatically, so you don't have to take care about anything other than writing your contents, publish it to the GitHub servers, and then you can see the output and verify if the output is okay. And this is also for the reviewers of the pull requests to see if the document is still in shape and everything works as expected. Any questions?
So I'll just say this, one of those wiki articles, the one about ASCII-Doc, gives a lot of detail and exactly step-by-step how you put the tool up, how you do that. And I think the main thing for the reviewers that will be looking at this is to understand how we come at it, because I think also there's a disconnect, David, from the IHE supplement to the technical framework to what we can support out of the can, with ASCII-Doc, like section numbers that are discontiguous. You have a jump from 2 to 10, how does that work? So that's really why this tool is so important.
That's actually, we can use it for different purposes. This is the one purpose, and the other purpose is actually to drive some more verification steps. For example, we have the capability of ASCII-Doc, as it is kind of a type system internally, to come up with customized types. For example, we have a requirement type for which we can specify attributes and the sequence of contents, and we can then just run verifications against those specific blocks in the supplement. So the purpose of the ASCII-Doc converter tool is manifold in that sense.
Yes. Yeah. It gives us the metadata.
All right.
Okay. Thank you, Dave. Remember how to share in Zoom as opposed to Teams. So just very quickly, going back to this, right? We have 4 profiles in one supplement, and this version 1.0 will have gateways defined specifically for DEC and ACM and general for V2. And then also we have clear linkages to referenced standards, those standards that upon which this is built. And of course, there's 3 volumes. And so when you look at that, how are the volumes organized? So I'm going to spend time now going into the actual organization. So volume, and I didn't put on this slide volume 0, the general stuff. But we have for each profile, we have the normal profile internal sections. So actors, transactions, content modules. We're explicitly calling those out this time. Actor options, profile overview, concepts, and the use cases, and then the safety, effectiveness, and security considerations as a separate item. I'll talk about that in a minute. And then we have that for the 4 profiles. So each one of the profiles. 1.0 will have a lot of detail in SDPi P, a lot of detail in -R for reporting, and some in alerting, but in 23 we'll extensively expand alerting in the 2.0 version, and then not much at all in the control. So this 1.0, you're going to see it diminishing returns as you go through these as a 1.0. And then if you look at that editorial plan wiki article I mentioned, you'll see what the plan is for next year and beyond. We then have 3 appendices in volume 1. One for requirements management for plug and trust interoperability. This is something that we've really is unique that we're doing here, which is how do we support what we call requirements interoperability, requirements that are identified in multiple different standards, and then be able to integrate that so that when you comes time to test a system that is implemented some set of these profiles, you're able to actually get traceability back to the requirements that drove those, not only in the supplement, but in the source foundational specifications and standards. So there's a section on that and explains all of that. We have another unique section. You'll see it has a slightly different name from this, but it's basically references, Appendix B, where we put a whole lot more work in this supplement on references. We'll take a look at that. And then we've done something else unique, which is we've pulled out the use cases, which used to be buried only in the profile. Okay, so a separate case. And we've identified that use cases actually often can require multiple capabilities across multiple profiles to be implemented. So we call those out. In general, we don't talk about technology. We talk about what does the clinical use case look like, what is trying to be accomplished, and then that gets allocated and mapped in to each one of the profiles. Okay, so that is something unique here, is having this general use case approach and then having the specific requirements identified by that allocated to and detailed in each one of the profiles. So the supplement, and as you know, for transactions, we have one-to-many. So we have Dev 23 allocated through Dev 50, but right now, I think, David, where did we hit 40, 41 or something like that with the actual 1.0 transactions that we're going to implement. Those are called out in these profiles, and they point to these. But what is unique, and you can have a transaction that's used in multiple profiles. So that's one thing. The other is that we've taken, as we've done in other in the IHE devices technical framework, the protocol specific content is in a subsequent appendix within volume 2. So the medical device profile for web services, the web services messaging, all of that detail is in Appendix A. And the Appendix A then points to the various transactions that supports, as well as shows extensions and other things. What this doesn't show is Appendix B, which is the gateway. So we have the specific gateway between the SDPi, SDC messaging and DEC and ACM in HL7 version 2. So that is the organization you're going to see here, but that separation between those. And then going to volume 3, what we've done, and we're in the middle, literally right now, in reorganizing this a little bit more. But we've gone in and we've taken the existing structure from the 2019 PCD technical framework. We've updated that with the IHE supplement template, which was updated in 2020. I think it's been updated recently again. And so we've normalized that together. And then we've just added biceps sections. So we've kept that and then said, this is what is new and unique to biceps. And then we have pointers to those sections here. For example, just this last week, we've added a sex and gender section here in volume 3 under the biceps part, and then that gets mapped both to where to the content modules, but also in volume 1, but also to a gateway. How does that traverse from an SDC world into a V2 deck world, and how does that get communicated? So that kind of semantic content, the biceps specific stuff, is in volume 3, but we're trying to do minimal violence to that. So with that, I think I'm going to spend the rest of this time here. Let me look and see. I'm sorry. Let me just go back, and I think that's all a lot of time in background topics. And like I said, this is a first session, first out of the station for doing this. So we've covered the big picture, the 4 profiles, how those relate, how we went about developing them, a little bit about GitHub, and how the focus is on that, how we generate the HTML. All IHE profiles are now HTML based. They're maintained in HTML. And so that was the target that we've done. This is how we get there. And then I told you a little bit about the review of the outline in the supplement. So how we went from the organization of 2019, we updated it for a 2020 version, which hopefully we're able to publish in 2022. And then the supplement to that technical framework, IHE Dev Technical Framework, is also organized that way. So this is how we came about the outline that you'll see. It's a little different from the existing IHE PCD, soon to be Devices Technical Framework organization. But once that is published, you'll see it aligns well. So with that, let's just take in the remaining time a look at some of the distinctives. So we'll just go through the actual rendered HTML, probably pop into the ASCII doc behind it, and look at the topics of some of the things that are unique. So my assumption is that if you're reviewing the SDPi supplement, you're familiar with the organization of IHE profiles, technical framework specifications in general. And so what is different here? And because this is stuff that you're going to come across, you're going to say, wait a second, what's going on with that? And so these are the topics that I've identified. And I'm sure as people dig into it in the coming weeks, over the next month, they'll identify some other things that will add into this initial list. But if we look at that, and I will be looking at the rendering that came from that push that David did earlier today. So remember, this is, you just saw David do this one. This was that uncommenting one item in volume 2 appendix B. I then opened from that generated version, this version of the supplement. Okay, and this is the HTML, the long form that was generated. I haven't said that we are anticipating generating a multi-page version. So if you go, for example, to some of the ITI's most recent versions, you'll see a multi-page one where you might have a page, a separate HTML file for the SDPi P profile, SDPi A profile for the appendices, and then you would have structure within that page. For 1.0, this first draft for public comment, that was something we can add later. But it's also, it's the long form. We might be able to do this to where we're able to collapse the left side. So as you look at it, dude, that's a lot. The good news is, but it only goes down to 3 levels, by the way. And some of our sections are 6, even 7 levels deep. So what we might try to do is do a collapsible one here, where you can drill down and find stuff, but not be overwhelmed trying to navigate across all of this table of contents. And we also, in the future, may end up having a tab across the top. So you'll see some of the most recent IHE profiles, especially that are Fire-based, have different tabs along the top. You know, they have a home tab. They might have one for each profile or for each volume. And then you open the volume one, you can go into the profiles, and then maybe a tab for requirements or other artifacts and things like that. So we may do that in the subsequent rendering. But talking to Mary Younger, she said a lot of people just really like the long form. So this is the most like Word, and you know, That's the way it works. Okay, and then the one other thing I'll say here is that you'll see these yellow comments. These are to-dos that we put in the text or highlight things to saying, so this is work that needs to be done. And so we'll do that. Hopefully you'll see very few, if any, of those in what we review for 1.0 or getting to the 1.0 version. But that's what this means. Something happened where the logo is not showing up. It used to be there, so we just stick that in there. So if you see these yellow comments, it really is to those who are editing, trying to get issues, and we can everything resolved, and we can toss them in there. And you know that when you're looking at it to review it, and you say, well, where did the IHE logo and homepage stuff go to? You'll know that we know that problem, and we're working on it. Okay, with that, as we look through this, and I'm just going to scroll down here, these are the introduction to the supplement. This is stuff straight out of the template. This is stuff I'm working on right now, the SDPi supplement overview. So you're going to see a lot of this stuff the same as what you would see in others, only it's getting rendered in HTML from ASCII doc. I'm going to pop real quick, though, to some of the areas. For example, topics of interest. So the topic of interest, remember that we have worked on are specific issues that we say, how do we kind of do that? And they may be open issues or closed in questions, or they might be closed. So what we've done that is unique is in the open and closed issues section of this supplement, you'll see this. So these are the ones that are open. And this is system context and profiling use. And if you were to click on that, and that's the nice thing with ASCII doc is we have a lot of embedded content, you end up with this system context and profiling use right here. This is the context, the open issue. So we haven't pulled a GitHub issue because we haven't resolved exactly how we're going to do that. Okay, so that's in this open question. So these links in here, where appropriate, go to that Confluence page. So they're open. We have a little summary item, but then you can go see, well, who's been talking about it and where are we at? Okay. And then also you'll notice that there's down in the closed issues, though, we actually then connect to the GitHub. So for this connect time delay algorithm, it was an early one. We pulled in a GitHub issue to say, okay, we've decided how to do it. Let's go to that issue. And when we do that, we end up, when you click on this one here, so I just clicked on issue 103, that takes you to this point here, okay? And this is one that's closed. We fixed, it's been integrated. But now you can go in the top level, it has that point to the Confluence page. And so you can navigate back to all of that discussion. That includes documentation. It's messy, okay? The final approach and the content that we defined, and as we went through it, this was one that was put out there, like I think Peter, you put that out there in 2020, middle of 2020. But David went in, so you can find a link to that. You can look at the discussion, the comments, the review, everything and everybody, right? This is Javier, David, and then finally, what went into the point when it was merged. Okay, so you see that merge point, and you can actually go back and see, again, what does that look like? I think, David, if I click on here, I'm going to end up with the same thing. Okay. Yeah, if I go over here, it's the same thing. Where do I actually see the, well, I'm not going to worry about it. Bottom line is when you come from the supplement, what we do differently is we're able to let the reviewer not only know the open and closed issues, but those are tied to the GitHub issue, and that also identifies where it got handled within the spec. So that's what you see here, for example, is where did you actually implement that? You can go back to see how was that integrated, what were the files that were touched, and you can go back all the way to the discussion. And so that's what we're doing uniquely here. Any questions on that or additional comments before I go on to the next part? Okay. As we look on the bottom here, this is all normal stuff. I think I'm just going to say one thing about the IEEE part. We do have we did negotiate, since a lot of this stuff is IEEE based, and we're using that. We got permission from IEEE to actually do that. And this is that content in verbatim. And we also have a footnote here. So if you click on that, you'll end up seeing that there's this right here. So we have the content in the top level, and then a footnote that we can basically use throughout the spec that takes you back to that approval. So that's what we've done there. Let's see, the volume 0 stuff. When you go into here, you're going to see the summaries and the definitions. Notice that we actually have a lot of hyperlinks to the glossary. So if you're wondering, these are actor summary definitions, but we also have a way of going in and saying a SOMS participant, and then that will connect you down to here, what the SOMS participant is. And then if we have links to what that implements or other definitions, we have the link to a references section, which we'll talk about in a moment. So these are the gateway, these are the definitions for the actors. We'll probably hyperlink this, I think, to the actual volume 1 actor specs shortly. Transaction summaries. So these are all the transactions, new and modified. But we also have the summary definition that is duplicated straight out of the volume 2 transaction itself. So this text is the same, it gets pulled in. And notice we also have hyperlinked to the definitions of these, just as they have within the volume. So that's what we've done there. And then the last thing that is actually pretty interesting is we've expanded the glossary. You know, there's a lot of work in the glossary, and ultimately this content will end up being integrated into the volume 0 IHE all frameworks glossary. But we teasing that apart now was just very problematic. So what we decided to do was just put everything in there, and we ended up not only having a glossary for some of those specific terms that are unique, like this, biceps, along with the acronym, but also we added references and a type. So where appropriate, like a clinical function, we actually have a reference here to the standard where that comes from, and we have kind of a type. So in future uses of this, we might be able to organize this glossary for our purposes by type. We have alternative acronyms and definitions and synonyms and things like that. So all of which to say the glossary is more than your previous glossary. When in doubt, we just stick it in there and we'll sort it out later. And we discussed that with Mary, and she was fine with that. It'll be interesting to get public comment on that. And then to that end, notice I put a supplement version notes. So as you go through reviewing this, you will see numerous of these notes. So we try to provide inline documentation of, by the way, this is not what you've seen before, as well as, and what is new, as well as sometimes you'll see a version note that says, has a question. So for SDPi 1.0, we might have a question at the bottom for reviewers to say, when you're looking at this, please consider this specifically and provide feedback. So you'll see these supplement version notes throughout. Let's see, I need to move on quickly here. Again, this is being finalized right now, but what we've done here, how much do I have on this, right? In this version here, let me see how much I actually have in there. You know, so for each one of these, for example, SDPi-P, you'll see the actor diagram and the tables and those things, and we'll next week we'll talk about these more specifically. But you can look here on the left and you see the organization that I showed you earlier, and we have you know, actor, this section here, actor options, a set of options, some of which we just talked to, some of which will be in subsequent versions, required actor groupings, concepts and use cases, and then safety, effectiveness, and security considerations. So Before, we've had safety considerations in especially the IHE devices technical framework. We've had security considerations throughout IHE. We've extended this to be a single section, effectiveness, security, safety, effectiveness, and security, SES considerations, which is tied back to the ISO IEC Joint Working Group 7 standards around safety, effectiveness, and security, specifically risk management, like 80,001-1 standard or the 81,001-1. And those requirements that come from that can be captured in these sections. So this kind of gives us a little more robust way of looking at that. This will be documented more both above in the supplement, but especially in Appendix A of Volume 1. So I'm going to very quickly go down to this is the alerting. So I just did the reporting, alerting, control, all have the same structure. Volume A or Volume 1, Appendice A has this requirements management for plug and trust interoperability. So this is how we look through that, and a lot of documentation about that, how we model requirements as a core model, and then how do we integrate that, and how do we plan on integrating that with the Gazelle master model. So there's a lot of background documentation, especially around the metadata. So David showed you that for ASCII doc, we can have for a block within the ASCII doc source, additional attribution and types that allow us to capture that information that we can use subsequently. For example, for requirements interoperability, traceability. That'll all be documented in this section here. And then this reference section is another unique item. References, we have, there's no good place within IHE technical framework to provide a general reference standards section other than for a specific transaction or profile. But again, this is unique. We have 4 of them. And when you look at the IHE devices technical framework, a lot of these references will go across that framework. So what we've done is we've collected all this stuff into a single appendice. I added a version note. I explained what we're doing there. So we're trying to be helpful in that regard. And these are all reference standards. This is a specific ASCII doc bibliography type of block. And so we have the actual reference standard here, how you, the name in detail, how you go get it. And now within the standard in various places, I'll show you one, or maybe David will, when we look at some transactions, you'll see that we just call this out here, but then it'll get hyperlinked to this referenced standards section. So now we can have a central place for talking about the specific references, and then hyperlink back to that for people to be able to navigate to that easily. This is a set of ones that we've come up with for 1.0. It's a long list of reference standards. These are standards that have requirements that we talk to. And then a section, we're not in 1.0 detailing this out. I'll add some more comment in here before we publish this, as you can see in the yellow. But this is intended to have standards conformance. So some standards like 11073, 10207, the biceps standards has an implementation conformance statement table. And so we will pull that table into here, and then we will have pointers for, we'll identify what we actually do or do not implement in this specification, and then pointers to where you can go see where those requirements are implemented. So the standards conformance is a unique aspect of that. And then we have a bibliography. That bibliography says, here's information. There's not normative requirements, but boy, it sure is helpful to use and to reference. So we collect all of those, and we organized it by media, presentations, publications, presentations, these articles, these kinds of things. And so this is a bibliography. So this is a pretty extensive section here for references that's very useful. And then finally, for volume 1, and then we'll spend some time in volume 2, we have use cases, a whole section on use cases. And we have an introduction for how we're doing use cases themselves, and just in general. and how we are capturing that information. And then each one of the use cases has this format. We're using a Gherkin type of specification, and Ken Fuchs is the one that has been detailing this out. Again, this is from a high clinical level, and for some reason, David, we don't have the rendering on here. Usually Ken provided diagrams for each one of these, so that's something that's broken. We need to figure out what happened to that. Sorry, Ken. But we have the general narrative, right? Just simple thing to read. A technical view, which kind of gives you the business systems that they might use, involve technical preconditions. So given these and that, so before the scenario, what is the context? And then the different scenarios and a set of these. The device is connected to a network with a time source. We don't say what that time source service is. That will be specified in the SDPi P profile, and it's specified in the SDC standards that we reference. So, but this is the way we capture that. So this is a new level of detail that we haven't done before. Much more rigorous, much easier to follow, and then to take those requirements, that detail, and map those from the different profiles that in which we actually implement those capabilities. So we have that. And so that is volume 0, volume 1, the supplement in general. David, I'm going to turn this over to you. Do you want me to navigate, or do you want to navigate to just look at one profile and then one, in Appendix A a little bit?
Yeah, I think I can just explain while you're sharing, so
okay.
It should be doable. Yeah, the transactions chapter is built up of the core that describes the transactions that we reserve for the SDPi supplement, which is essentially grouped between 23 and 40, somewhat 40-ish transactions, capturing different properties of a service-oriented architecture in terms of the SDC protocol, including the discovery, including the exchange of the medical device representation, sharing the MDIP, and being able to get notified on any changes to that MDIP of a particular provider. We typically have the roles SOMS provider and SOMS consumer, which is in the transaction or in this chapter, in the transaction chapter, just an abstract view on the system. So we do not specify the actual data exchange, but the actors that are involved and the messages and the payload of those messages and the trigger events that are part of the transactions that are exchanged. Then later on, we have.
Hang on 1 second. Let me show one thing, David. Notice these hyperlinks, right? We've talked about those. So if I click on SOMS provider, I go back to the glossary section, right, to where that's defined. If I click on, notice we have this reference standards, right? If I click on that, that takes me back to the detail we just looked at in that references appendice. So it's pretty sweet.
It is. And it's actually built up in a way that we split up the actual data transmission, so the binding to the transport layer, and the more abstract and formal message definition from each other. That being said, we have chapter 3, which encapsulates all the transactions and the messages that are exchanged by those transactions. And then later on in the Appendix A, we have a binding to the MDPWS specification, which means we then boil everything down to the actual message transmission and say you have to serialize information this and that way in order to be able to exchange information between the SOMS providers and consumers, along with a couple of requirements that then pose restrictions on the optionalities of the SDC specification, which is one of the purposes of the profile. yeah, and as you can see, we have the excerpts of the messages. We have, as you can see, there are the dotted in there. There's XML comments. We always insert it when there is something that is dynamically inserted during runtime. So it really depends on the actual data transmission. Do we exchange data between a ventilator and a monitor, or between a infusion pump and a ventilator, or whatever? Depending on those specific content modules and profiles of those specific devices, the content within this XML messages changes accordingly. Well, and that is the whole magic behind it. We have the abstraction layer that is abstract transactions. We have specific implementations which go into an appendix. We later on can exchange those implementation if at some point we realize MDWS is not the answer to our problem. We can exchange it by something else without touching the general concept of SDPi and the messages that have to be exchanged, which also helps people in transitioning from one technology to another without breaking the whole system and the whole product development.
And that is, I'm trying to see where that linkage was.
It's essentially, if you look in the appendix chapters, in the beginning of each subsection, there is a link back to the transaction. For example, the hello message is encoded as a, yeah, so this is actually announced network presence is a def23. And we say it's encoded by using WS Discovery hello, which is directing to the specification. We actually do not have a link back to the, is that something that we should add here?
Yeah, because as
makes sense, right?
As
yeah,
you
for
just
some
said,
reason,
we have links. The beauty of this is you have links from Appendix A into the transactions, not vice versa, so that if you want to have some other transport, you don't do violence to the transaction, you just map it in. So yeah, we should have that in there.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's interesting. That's, for some reason, that's missing. Definitely something that I jot down to just add it later. So obviously the transaction that is satisfied in those Appendix A are listed in the title of the subsections, but to make it more explicitly, we should link it back to the actual transaction.
And then
chapter.
Can you just say something about these requirements sections here?
Yeah, as I said, yeah, this is something specific to the supplement. We had the idea, because of the requirements and operability, to render requirements a little different to the rest of the guidance or normative text in this profile, and say, okay, we explicitly model a requirement that, in addition to what we have in the SDC standards, poses restrictions on a system implementation by saying, okay, a SOMS consumer has to fulfill this and that and that and this, and this is then captured in a set of requirements, and this set of requirements is uniquely numbered. Yeah, don't put too much interpretation in the actual number. It's just a random number, but it's yeah, it's fixed and will be static for further releases. And that means whenever we refer to the SDPi supplement, we can also refer to specific requirements, and internally those are captured as as blocks that are annotated with attributes. For example, the requirement number, if the requirement is a shall or a should requirement, and so forth. And later on, we can also think about linking requirements to each other, and linking them back to other specifications, depending on if that's possible sometime in the future. Yep. But we now started capturing the information not only as prose text, but also as objects within the specifications, which is then rendered as prose text. And this is the beauty about it.
Yeah. So this will evolve and become even more beautiful over the future. But this is something that we could do easily in ASCII doc that you just couldn't do otherwise. That will enable us to truly implement requirements interoperability. And also right now, the only way to kind of extract a set of 40 requirements from a spec is to do a text search and look for the shalls and the shoulds and that stuff. And it's really error prone, whereas we'll be able to just run this to generate a specification that then implementers would be able to pull into their requirements management tooling, like doors or something. So this opens the door to a whole new thing. Anything else, David? We're almost out of time, so I want to hit Appendix B and Volume 3 very quickly.
Yeah, Appendix B is actually the gateways, which is not in my realm of crafting. This is something that Peter Kranich mainly developed as part of the Volume 2.
Right.
And yeah, maybe Peter can also lose some words on it.
No, we're going to dedicate the Wednesday next week session will be focused on answering questions. As you look at the organization here, though, you just see what Peter's done is he has overview of gateways, okay, standing in the gap between an SDC world, an SDC world, and then other systems like HL7 V2 or Fire, and then these two subsections here. So this is specifically, it gets very explicit about how do you map and navigate when you have data that starts from a device that's plugged at an emergency bed, or I'm sorry, at an ICU bed that you want to get into the EHR, maybe using DEC on one side and using SDPi R on the other side for SDC-based reporting. This goes into those details, and we'll talk a lot. We'll spend a whole session on that next Wednesday. And then the last thing for today is the organization for this Volume 3, semantic content modules. Like I said, we have done, there's a lot of updates in the organization here. And what you see here is that we've really been careful to just insert biceps sections. So we migrated all the Volume 3 stuff from the 2019 technical framework into here for the new template, IHE template, and we pulled all the device stuff into section 8 of that volume as opposed to 3 and 7, I think. All the general stuff we pulled into 8.1.2, and then all the device specializations here. And then what you'll see is underneath biceps, for example, you'll see here, we'll add detail into here very quickly, very soon. But it'll be general detail for the Volume 1, but we have within the biceps section, we just talk about the biceps content module, how biceps works with a descriptive model and a state model, the relationship between that and the classic DIM, just a very simple, this is how one relates to the other, because the current profiles, V2-based profiles uses the classic DIM, as well as the PhD stuff uses a version of the classic DIM. Nomenclature, these kinds of things. David put in an extension model, as we talked in here. So even requirements are in there. So that is the organization. I'm actually going to change it a little bit today, but that's what's in there. And for that organization, we have another one of these version notes with a specific reviewer question here. And I talk about the updates, why this looks different from what you saw in 2019, but also how it is organized with biceps, classic, maybe in the future PhD, since we have at least one PhD profile now as part of the technical framework. So that is what we'll see there in this volume here. So let's go back and just see. I think I touched everything. Yeah, the other thing, David, I didn't mention it just now, but in Volume 3, we have that referenced artifacts, where in Volume 3, for example, you might have a reference to an XML file that includes MDIB specs that could be used for conformity assessment or for extending the MDIB. All of that is in this directory here, and would be referenced from the Volume 3 section, for example. So those are all kinds of unique things that we have for that. I think for an overview, this is quite a bit. Like I said, this is a work in progress. You know, we're still working on getting 1.0 content complete, as you saw, especially for Todd's ones in volume 1 and 3, and getting the linkages up. But as a reviewer, hopefully this helps you understand kind of the unique things, the overall organization of it. And what we'll talk about then in our next session, which is Monday, is we'll provide you a profiles overview. In that profiles overview, we'll look at especially SDPi P and reporting and and it'll kind of trace from the flow from use cases to provide profiles, transactions, and content modules. So going into more detail for each one of those, hopefully we get enough 1.0 content in there. We don't have too many loose ends, but that'll be the orientation for that. And then the gateways orientation overview on the 21st next week. And we'll just really drill down on those three. Peter will be giving us kind of a review of a lot of detail. And we hope to be able to test these gateway actors out, especially next year in some connectathons. And so I'm looking forward to that session in a week. And then coming back after the holidays on January 11th, we'll have a general question and answer session, opportunity for follow-up questions from people that have had a chance to review it, who have feedback on what topics that we didn't address in these recordings. And then finally, like I said, we are planning on probably redoing these, getting our experience and doing a recorded set of these before we go to public comment. So once we get all of the 1.0 comments in, updates, and are ready to send it for publication for public comment, we'll probably do a recording and presentation of these a little more polished. So with that, any questions before we stop this session here today? Okay, well, thank you everyone for joining us, and I hope to see you on Monday and Wednesday.